There are few positive things to come out of this year, but one I think we may all agree on is that Europe, despite the economic uncertainty and global pandemic, has managed to buck the global trend of falling electric vehicle sales. In the first half of this year alone, electric vehicles in Europe experienced a 57% increase in sales, while the rest of the European automotive market slumped by 37%. If you're outside of Europe, you might be forgiven for thinking that the explosion in sales was a result of cars like the Tesla Model 3 continuing its meteoric rise in popularity, especially after hearing the news that in May this year, the Tesla Model 3 was the third most popular car on sale in the UK, electric or not. And in fact, back in July this year, I made a video on this channel about why the Tesla Model 3 was dominating electric vehicle sales charts around the world, all except in Japan. You can watch it here, and I'll leave a link to it below in case you're interested. But as 2020 comes to a close, we are facing a different reality from our middle-of-year assessment of the global electric vehicle market, one that shows, despite Tesla's dominance in many markets around the world, other automakers, legacy automakers, are fighting back in Europe. Take Germany, for example, where electric vehicles have accounted for 9.98% of all new car registrations this year to date, while plug-in hybrids have accounted for 10.55%, meaning that more than one-fifth of all new cars this year in Germany have been sold with a plug. And if we look at the number one car, it's no longer a Tesla, but the lowly Renault Zoe, followed by the Hyundai Kona Electric and the recently launched Volkswagen ID.3. The Model 3, meanwhile, well, that occupies 7th position. For those outside of Europe, the concept that Model 3 might be less popular than electric vehicles from legacy automakers might be pretty alien. But having spent a large part of my life in Europe before moving here to the US, I think I'm in a position to provide at least some reasons for this interesting statistic. But before I do, I should of course note that while German car buyers aren't always representative of car buyers in other parts of Europe, it is by far the largest automotive market in the EU. If you take Europe as a whole, Germany is responsible for one-fifth of all new car registrations, and that should give you an idea as to how important those sales charts I mentioned are when it comes to European market dominance. First, I think we need to acknowledge that each market around the world has its own unique requirements and preferences. In a world where we've become used to global models, especially when it comes to SUVs and crossovers, it might be difficult to imagine that, in an increasingly small world, regional markets would prefer certain types of cars over others. But Europe, as a whole, tends to be more welcoming of hatchbacks and station wagons, or estate cars, than you would find in North America. And yes, while there are some European markets where sedans are still reasonably popular, the majority of European buyers prefer hatchbacks, although crossovers and SUVs are still big. This is not down to just form, but function. In larger cities where parking is at a premium, the added flexibility of having one car that's a hatchback, especially with smaller size vehicles, means that while you might not always be able to carry a lot of stuff with you, it's possible to do so for those occasional trips where your car's small load bay isn't enough, simply by pushing the rear seat down. In fact, every car on the top 10 list of EV sales in Germany is a hatchback, with the exception of that Tesla Model 3. Size is another major consideration for European buyers, especially those who live in large cities. The larger the car, the harder it is to find parking and drive in busy city streets, so it's no surprise too that all of the cars on this list are considered C-segment. That's a compact car or smaller. But it's not just parking constraints. In some markets in Europe, for example, vehicles are taxed based on their sticker price, their overall size, their gross vehicle weight, and their emissions. Obviously, electric vehicles aren't going to have any tailpipe emissions, but those other taxation factors do come into play. For example, in Germany, how much of an incentive you can actually get for buying an electric vehicle depends on the sticker price of your new EV. If you buy an electric car with a net list price of less than €40,000, which today is about 48,000 US dollars, you potentially stand to receive anything up to €9,000 off the sticker price in the form of government, and automaker-backed incentives. If you buy a vehicle that's more expensive than that, you'll get nothing. And right now, the Tesla Model 3's most affordable variant, the Tesla Model 3 Standard Range Plus, sits just below that threshold. No other Tesla comes in under that, and the majority of high-end brands like Audi's, Mercedes-Benz, Jaguar and Porsche are all way too expensive to be eligible for incentives. In fact, the BMW i3 is the only other premium vehicle to sneak in under that price limit. Further to that all, in some European countries, local governments add even more incentives, and some places offer residents extra cash if they happen to trade in an old dirty diesel or clunker for their EV. And that has a big impact on what cars people ultimately buy. While there are people who are quite happily spending more and foregoing incentives to get behind the wheel of a performance Model 3 or another similarly priced high-end electric car, the choice to buy an EV in Europe is often far more driven by the desire to save money. And I think that's primarily because of the cost of fossil fuels in Europe. It's far higher than it is in, say, North America. In the EU, it's not uncommon to pay upwards of the equivalent of $5 or maybe even $6 per gallon equivalent of gasoline, which is far, far more than you'd have to pay in either Canada or the US. That price difference for filling up is down to the high taxes that are put onto fossil fuels, which, especially during a period of economic uncertainty, means that there's a more affordable alternative to filling up with dino juice, so it makes good financial sense to do so. Yes, I know it's not really dino juice, but well, there are lots of things that aren't really what we refer to them as. Peanuts, koala bears, fireflies. So yes, I'm going to call it dino juice. Anyway, to get back to my point and away from my little rat run, if you are living in a country where filling your car up is twice as expensive as it is in the US, the benefits of dumping the pump and going electric are similarly amplified. Add to the disincentives of higher fuel costs for petrol and diesel vehicles with purchase incentives and perks like lower sales tax and access to things like bus lanes and free city centre congestion zones means that many more people are deciding to make the switch to electric for financial reasons rather than just we want to be clean and green and kind to the environment or because this car goes really fast and it can drive itself. Of course, those with larger budgets are less likely to feel the effect of higher fuel costs, and at this point I'm going to postulate means that they're less likely to go electric for financial reasons. But when buyers are more focused on daily driving costs, they're more likely to pick more affordable models, and there's a lot of new EVs just coming to market in Europe. Then, of course, there's the differences in range requirements in Europe. While some Europeans, Germans especially, have no big issue driving long distances, thanks to the Autobahn, average daily driving requirements are often smaller in Europe than they are in other parts of the world. And because things tend to be a little closer together, unless you live in a really rural area, the chances are that many Europeans don't feel as restricted by small and mid-range cars as, say, Americans, Canadians, or Australians might. I mean, when I was still living in the UK, driving the 270 miles to my mum in Norwich, I used to live in Bristol, was considered a day-long trip, something you actually planned for weeks or maybe even months ahead. Where I live now, just outside of Portland, Oregon, people think nothing of driving non-stop to Seattle for the day or driving down to California in a single morning. I personally now think nothing of driving 25 miles round trip just to get myself a takeout. Mid-range cars like the Renault Zoe and Volkswagen ID3, not to mention the smaller capacity versions of the Hyundai Kona EV, then there's the Volkswagen e-Golf and Smart for 2 to name some, are popular because most meet the intersection of lower purchase price, availability for generous incentives and perks, and are eminently cheaper to run over a few years than a petrol or diesel vehicle. And I think all of the above, plus what I feel is a more cultural tendency to view cars as workhorses rather than status symbols in some, but not all European markets, means that switching to electric isn't just something that wealthy car buyers are doing. Add to this the fact that the Tesla Model 3 is more expensive right now in Europe than it is in the US, partly because of taxes, And it's easy to see why Tesla isn't number one in Europe. Will that change in the future? Maybe. When Tesla brings Giga Berlin online and starts production of local market Model 3 and Model Y, I expect Tesla sticker prices to drop for both vehicles. And if you think about it, it's no surprise that Berlin is where Tesla has chosen to begin series production of vehicles that are built using its new low-cost 4680 battery cells and lower-cost front and rear castings. By lowering the complexity and build costs of Model Y and Model 3, I believe Tesla will be ultimately able to dramatically lower the sticker price of both of these vehicles for European buyers. But for now, it is behind other, more affordable legacy automakers. And I think we should be okay with that. Europe's EV market is far more advanced than any other market because of its welcoming incentive packages and its pretty big disincentives for ICE owners, combined with a legislative focus not just on getting electric vehicles on the road, but making electric vehicles affordable. Here's hoping we see other markets follow suit as quickly as possible. That's it for today. As always, thanks to the folks on my right for being our $15 to $49 a month Patreon supporters. Special thanks go to our $50 a month patrons, that's John Lyons, Regine Fellows, Jeffrey Songster and Tesla in the Gong, and our deepest gratitude to our $100 a month Patreon supporters. That's Marcel Ward, Reggie Watts, JP Fagerback, Sean Ueda, Will Graylin, and Ian. If you'd like to become a Patreon supporter yourself, you can do so by following one of the links below. Or you can also follow a link to make a donation to us through Ko-fi or Bitcoin if you'd prefer. You'll also find a link to our free Discord server, so sign up and come and join in the fun. Chat with the rest of the team and the show fans. Also, I would really love it if you check out our Redbubble store. It's too late to get something for the holidays, but it's never too late to support the channel. After the names are finished scrolling, you will see a new suggestion for a video to watch from this channel, so please consider watching it if you haven't, and I'll be back very soon. Thanks for joining me, and as always, keep evolving!